What I've been up to for the past few days is I've been working on my kitchen, the base cabinets to begin with. I went and I bought a bunch of rough lumber. This is hard maple. Now this wood is pretty good quality, but it's kiln dried. And when you kiln dry something or dry something quickly, stresses build up inside the wood. And I guess you've all seen it if you've done any. As soon as you cut it, it starts to twist or bend all over the place. So part of this video is going to be showing how I deal with that kind of situation. The other part is milling it down to a usable dimension, finished dimensions, without a joiner. I never have owned a jointer. I got one planned to build in the future at some point. But in the meantime, I've developed a method to do this on the table saw. It does require a planer. If you want it smooth, that is. You can do the whole dimensioning, though, down to something that you could scrape smooth or sand smooth on the table saw with a good sharp blade. First thing I'm going to do is cut it to the length that I need. All the pieces that I need right now are pretty short, so cut the rough board. I'm not going to trim the end off yet. That'll take up the snipe from the planer. So from this first piece, I'm going to try to get my 3 pieces that are 1 1/4 inches wide. The thickness that they're supposed to wind up being is 3/4 of an inch, but I'll have to see how it goes. That's the beauty of working with rough wood. You're in control of how thick or thin your stock winds up being. So the first step is to rip it to 1.5 inches. I've got a big defect on the edge here, and I can see that this grain is really wavy. So that tells me that this thing is going to go crazy when I try to cut it. So I've got my saw set to 4.5 inches. That should give me the 3 pieces that I need. I'm going to make that first cut with this rough edge up against the fence. There is another way of doing this, and that's to make a jointer sled. That's where you would have something that rides up against the fence that's already straight, like a good piece of plywood, and then you could double side tape or actually clamp this wood down to that, and then that will make a straight cut. But having that first cut straight is not much good if the next cut makes everything twist. So I just hold it up tight to the fence and guide it through as straight as I can. Okay, well that went a lot better than I thought it would. I had a little bit of binding about 2/3 into the cut. The way to deal with binding is to not panic. Don't let go of the wood. If you have to, keep your hand close to the switch so you can turn the saw off. That's the best way to stop it. Take it out of the blade and then make the cut again. And what that will do is it'll recut the offcut piece that's pinching the blade. This offcut is pretty much firewood. Put that over here. That leaves me with this one here, which is 4.5 inches wide. Actually a little less. So I'm going to cut it into thirds. So I'll set my fence to around 1 7/16 and make another cut. I often, have people comment on the riving knife thing. A riving knife will help to avoid that somewhat, but there are no guarantees with that. The riving knife can flex sideways and kickback can still occur. So I think it's always better to learn how to deal with this problem without the help of a safety feature that is not 100% effective and actually winds up getting removed on most saws. As strange as this sounds, another really good way to avoid kickback when the wood binds is to use a less powerful saw. A less powerful saw will often stall when the blade gets pinched like that, whereas a more powerful one will not and grab that wood and throw it back at you. Okay, well, a little bit more binding with that, but not as bad as I thought it would. These pieces are actually straighter than I thought they would be. They're not bending this way, they're bending actually up and down, so they're quite wavy that way. So that's where the stress is, the major stress anyway. I didn't mention it before, but you really need to make sure that your blade is 90 degrees to the table. Check that before you get going on this, and also that your fence is 90 degrees to that, because that's the way you index it. After you make that first cut, we'll make a side cut, and that has to be flat down on the table and held kind of loosely against the fence. The next series of cuts are to cut it down to thickness and make it straight that way. So I start with the stock flat and tight against the table saw top and use the fence more or less as a guideline to make it straight. Now, like I said before, you can set up a guide to do this, a piece of plywood to screw this down to, or clamp it down to, whatever you're comfortable with. That's the main thing. This is what I would consider kind of an advanced method. You really want to have some basic experience with the table saw before you get into something like this. The featherboard on the back there holds the stock tight against the fence as it exits the blade, and what it does is it keeps it going in a straight line. So what you wind up with on that first pass is a cut that's pretty close to deadly straight, actually. The only drawback is, as you could hear in the previous clip there, is that the offcut kind of gets pinched in there as well. So you got to know about that. You got to deal with that. It's not a big deal if you're prepared for it. The first two weren't that bad. On the third one here, I've got a real big bump right here in the middle. So what I'm going to do before I send it through the saw is I'm going to try to plane down a bit of that. Optional, I could do it without it, but I'll get a piece that's more close to the size that I need. I don't want to wind up cutting pieces that are 5/8 of an inch thick when I need 3/4. So stuff like this helps. For those first cuts, my fence was set to 1 inch. Now I'm going to move it into 15/16 and make another cut on the other side. Okay, as you saw, that didn't make a complete cut on that side, but what it did do was it cut down the high spot. So what you wind up with is something that's a lot straighter than the other side is, actually. So now I'll flip it over again, and I'll make another cut on this side over here, taking another 1/16 of an inch off. You'll notice that I've removed the featherboard from the back of the blade. I don't need that there anymore. For these cuts, instead of pushing it down tight to the table, I'm actually holding it up tight against the fence. Okay, well, that side, when I look at it, pretty straight, nice and flat too. I got a little burning there, but this is hard maple. My blade is not as sharp as it could be. And also I had to pause it to turn the camera off type thing. So I've got one more cut to make on the other side, and that's with the fence set at 13/16. That still gives me 1/16 of an inch on the planer to get it down to 3/4, which is plenty, actually. Should come out really well. Okay, the pieces are nice and flat now, but they're still a little bit crooked this way. I still have lots left over to get my final width, so I'm going to make a series of cuts in the same way as I did the first ones, except there won't be any featherboard involved. This is fairly straight to begin with. What I do is I put the cupped edge up against the fence and guide it through, holding it down flat to the table saw top. And then when that side's cut, I can move the fence again and make another cut on the other side, removing a bit more. And it shouldn't take any more than a couple cuts if the piece is fairly straight to begin with. Those are my 3 pieces ready for the planer. I'm not going to show that though. That's not the point of this video. I bet that there's more than a couple of you out there that are saying, wow, that's a lot of work. Well, it is, but you would really be doing the same amount of work if you had a joiner, because you more or less have to do the same thing. The only thing with this is that you're dealing with a table saw and the blade and moving the fence and all that. It is a little bit more time consuming, but it is entirely possible. And more than that, this video was about handling the wood itself as well. Dealing with the stress that's built up inside the wood. You have to be very careful if you don't have any experience doing it. That's the thing that gets a lot of beginners when they grab a piece of wood and start cutting it on the table saw. wow, it turns into a hockey stick and it kicks back at them. They don't expect that. After I had each one cut out, they all bent a different way. One to the point where I actually had to do a little bit of planing to knock down a really big knuckle that was sticking out there. But now I'm left with 3 pieces that are almost perfectly straight, certainly straight enough for what I want to do. And these are pieces that have a lot of figure, a lot of wavy grain. So those are the ones that'll give you the trouble. Those are the ones you have to look out for. Anything with straight grain is generally going to stay pretty straight when you cut it. It doesn't really build up that much drying stress. Anyway, I hope that was helpful to some of you out there. Like I say, use at your own risk. If you're not comfortable doing it, don't try it. If you believe that a jointer would be the better way to do it, by all means, go and get a jointer. This is just an option for those out there that don't have a jointer, don't really have the space to put a jointer in their shop, and would really like to work with rough lumber and get it down to a manageable size. It's a bit later. I've got all the narrow pieces cut out, and I realized that I had another piece to cut, and that's a wide one, and I never covered that, so I'll quickly go over that. First thing to note is that it's kind of limited. Most 10-inch saw blades will cut around 3.5 inches deep, so that's a total of 7. If you have a break in the middle there, maybe 1/2 inch, you can plane that with a hand plane, so you can go to 8 maybe maximum. I really don't like working with table saws that have the blades sticking up that high, that are cutting that much material at the same time. So I would limit it maybe to 5 inches at the most. So anyway, it's basically the same thing. I've got a piece of wood here that's 3.5, I think. I've raised my blade to a little bit higher than half that. What I'll do is I'll run it through this pass, then I'll flip it over and run it through again, and I'm holding it down to the table. There will probably be a slight mismatch when you run them through. One side might be higher than the other. Not anything to worry about. Move the fence over again, put it up against the fence, tight down to the table, make another pass. You'll definitely see an improvement in that one. As you push it through, they'll be more lined up. For this first cut, I want to make sure that the cup side of the stock is up against the fence. Okay, well, after just 3 cuts, I've got a side that's perfectly flat, or at least as flat as I need it to be. I got to make a couple more cuts to get it down to 13/16. I'll make sure that I'm taking the equal amounts off both sides, and that'll keep it as flat as you can possibly get it. Okay, I'm really going to go this time. Thanks for watching.